Everyone, today we are going to do something we haven't done in quite a while, and that's talk about another Milsurp rifle. Now this one, as the title of the video would imply, is the French MAS 36. Now French firearms are not something I have a tremendous amount of experience with, and it's also a type of firearm that is greatly maligned here, at least in the United States, in our firearms world. All kinds of jokes that people think they're extremely clever at making about French rifles. However, in reality, French military arms have been pretty fascinating. For a lot of the history, at least recent firearms history, the French were kind of on the cutting edge of firearms technology. You know, they were the first to introduce a smokeless powder cartridge to their military. They were pretty early on in adopting or trying to adopt semi-automatic rifles. So I think that they get some undeserved hate, at least again here in the United States gun industry or gun world, gun community, whatever you want to call us. But I think that this is a rifle that I don't know, deserves, I think, a second look from a lot of people here in the US, at least people who are interested in military surplus rifles. Now, there's a lot of really good historical videos on the MAS 36 out there. Ian on Forgotten Weapons has a fantastic video breaking down the history of the MAS 36, some of the differences and changes as it went on through production, which, for what it's worth, this is a wartime production one. This one is after the occupation of Germany and France. So this is going to show some of the later production features like the hooded front sight and whatnot. But again, if you want to know that kind of stuff, that's something better to check out over on Forgotten Weapons. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into the history of this, just the features of this rifle and what my thoughts are on it. So I guess starting from the bare bones basics, the caliber that this thing fires is the 7.5 French cartridge. 7.5 French, maybe counterintuitively from its name, is actually a 308 diameter projectile. Ballistically pretty similar to 308 Winchester. Instead of about 147 or 150 grain full metal jacket, we're looking at 139 grain full metal jacket, going similar velocities. The cartridges themselves even look pretty similar. A long time ago, I posted on my Instagram a picture of a 7.5 French cartridge and had people try to guess what it was, and most people wanted to guess that it was 308. So anyway, considering their adoption of a 308 like cartridge back in, well, pre this rifle, but really heavily with the MAS 36 back in the mid 30s, again, the French were kind of going towards that direction that the US and other NATO countries ended up going post-war. So a lot of really interesting stuff with this rifle, and I think from a logistical perspective, anyone who's a paper pusher in the military, this is also a dream rifle for them. It is an extremely simple rifle. There's very few parts. There's pretty much nothing for a soldier to screw up with it out in the field, except for the bayonet, but we'll talk about that. There's not a lot you need to issue with it. Because the bayonet is affixed to the rifle, you don't even need frogs or anything like that to be able to carry around your bayonet. Again, just a really I guess ideal rifle for the circumstances that the French found themselves in the mid 30s, at least as far as they were aware. We're going to go over the features of this rifle working back to front. On the back of this rifle, we just have a standard metal butt plate, pretty common for World War I, World War II style rifles. Although my understanding is that later adoptions or iterations of the MAS 36, they switched to a rubberized one. A lot of that had to do with the fact that they were going to be shooting rifle grenades predominantly. We have a fairly short length of pull, probably the shortest of any Milsurp rifle that I have experience with. You feel like your nose is getting pretty close to the back of the bolt when you're firing this thing, and if you're not careful with thumb positioning, it's easy to get that bit as well. but I guess, you know, maybe the French were smaller stature than us Americans, which for reference, I'm 6'2". The rifle would have had a nice cartouche here on the side of the stock. I have no visible evidence of that on the stock here. I don't know if that's because it's been sanded down or what the circumstances were, if possibly during war production times they didn't worry about that, or if that was just pre-war things, because I know a lot of the pre-war MOS 36s have that. But moving forward, probably one of its most visually distinct characteristics is this bent bolt knob. Now, the reason for that, again, as I understand it, and if I'm wrong, please feel free to correct me in the comments down below, although I usually don't have to invite people to do that. They'll do that on their own accord. That is to be able to position the bolt knob in a position where people are more familiar with on bolt actions, basically closer to where the trigger is, so that you can still very easily reach up after firing the trigger, and that when you close the bolt, it positions your finger right by the trigger while still being able to have the action actually being a little bit further back, which reduces the amount of machining they have to do into the rear of this receiver, because you don't have to cut a channel for that bolt to ride in. Now, the bolt itself is extremely simple. All you have to do is pull the trigger to remove this from the back of the rifle. You have what is very similar to like a RECCE bolt, and basically you have this little dial here in the back. This is one of the few bolts that I would actually feel comfortable disassembling on video, like not on a bench, because it is so simple and there's so few parts to get missing here. And again, if you want a detailed version of this, there's other videos available. But basically you press in on the back of the bolt. You can see, hopefully here, that there is a D and an M. You just put the D to this little notch, ladies, on the back, and that releases the back of the bolt. You have now your bolt itself, you have your firing pin, your spring, and the back of the bolt. Literally 4 parts to this bolt. Extremely, extremely simple, very hard to mess up. You could teach you know, again, especially if we're talking French military here, they have a huge colonial force, people from all over the world who don't necessarily have a common language. It is very easy to explain to a soldier, even if you don't share the same language, how to clean and maintain a rifle like this, with it being so simple. And that just inserts, and also it's worth mentioning, we got rear bolt lugs back here, but this is basically just a tube with a channel cut into it for your extractor and a bolt face drilled into the center of it. So again, a really, really simple mechanism on the bolt of this rifle. Now, moving forward, we have our rear sight. The rear sight is where we start getting into things where the French really showed how much they trust the individual soldier on the front to be able to adjust their rifle as their needs may arise. This gun has no way to adjust for windage or even to be able to re-zero it. Once this thing is zeroed at the arsenal, that's it. So the rear sight here, they actually have a number and letter system which corresponds to a grid. Basically, when they would finish these at the factory, they'd take them out on the range, they'd fire it, and then based on where the mean point of impact was, they would then assign that rear sight that corresponds to that impact position to the gun. Hey presto, your gun is now zeroed. And when you're considering a military who's going to be shooting uniform ammunition out of uniform rifles, you can afford to do that in a modern context when I'm getting ammo from wherever I can, or if I'm reloading my own ammo. Really, there's no way for me to adjust that. You can buy replacement rear sights online. However, most of the places that I found that sell them, they do not indicate which number sight you're getting, so it's really hard to know. I've even tried contacting certain companies, and most of the time they just don't even get back to me, because I've wanted to try to zero this to the standard like PPU ammo that I've been shooting out of this thing, but it's not available. Now you can also adjust this for elevation though, which obviously makes sense given you could be engaging at extended distances. And so you have this little button here on the side. I'll hopefully be rolling in close-up pictures, and then you just press that forward, and as you press that forward, the spring of the rear sight just raises up to meet that. This will go out to 1,200 meters. Again, I would say that's pretty optimistic, even for the cartridge. We're probably, I haven't run the numbers on it, but I'm assuming we're going transonic around probably 800-ish yards, if not sooner. So we're really just kind of lobbing stuff in there. But again, from the French perspective, in the colonies that they have, especially in Africa, you know, the British on several occasions were able to engage enemy troops well beyond their range to be able to return fire, and battles were won because they were able to lob bullets further than the enemy could lob bullets at them. So again, I understand it, and at least that's more in the realm of reality than you see on a lot of World War I type sites. Now, moving forward into the actual receiver and action here, we do have a removable floor plate. I'm just going to open up the bolt here. If you push in on the button here on the right side of the rifle, that will allow you to completely remove your floor plate, follower, and spring. This allows, again, if you don't trust the individual troops to be able to even walk around with a round in the chamber, you probably don't want them cycling rounds through the chamber to be able to unload it. So that is going to allow you to unload it without having to do that. Again, a very, very simple mechanism here, showing how few parts are actually needed to assemble this. Now, the follower, again, my understanding, early war, you could just close the bolt when empty. With the war production ones, very similar to like K98s or 1903 Springfields, if you try to close the bolt when empty, it doesn't go anywhere. And that's a good way to alert you that, hey, I need to put rounds in this thing. So if I want to close it, I can just push the floor plate down and then close the bolt over the top of that. Now, moving forward from there, we've got some nice wood hand guards. So, this thing was getting pretty hot with me shooting it today pretty quick and in the hot sun. This did give me good protection from that, although I can still feel heat radiating away from that. We have our barrel band here, you can see, which also acts as our sling loop. I'm assuming that this is a reproduction sling. If it is an original sling, then it is definitely like new old stock, because it looks pretty clean, but it does look appropriate on this rifle. And then moving forward from there, we've got our front sight. The front sight, again, in this case, is hooded. They were open in the earlier versions, but this hooded front sight actually works pretty well. I was doing mostly close-in shooting, like under 15 yards out here today, and you can almost use that front sight as almost like a ghost ring if you can get your front sight on that target. It's like almost like the caveman EOTech from AK shooting theory. Similar concept here. You've kind of just got that big ring. You just put that big ring on the target and you should be able to do a pretty good job with that. Now, moving forward from there, pretty simple. We just got our barrel sticking out the front. Although we've got two other little Jenguses here. This first one, if I hold it down here on the side, is your stacking lug, so you and your fellow troops can stack up your rifles while you're eating or sleeping or whatever else you're doing. Not something we really do much anymore, although they did make us do that in basic training, even in the Air Force with our M16s. And then underneath we have our built-in bayonet. So this is a pretty clever little piece here. It allows you to, again, keep your bayonet with the rifle wherever you go. Again, from a logistical standpoint, having to issue troops gear or position things on their body, this reduces the need to have any sort of bayonet sheath on their person, any sort of bayonet frog or anything like that, and that allows you to carry that with you. Now, there's a really good video, I think, on Forgotten Weapons. It's called like the French Finger Trap or something like that, where you can actually take another Moss rifle, take the bayonet out of that, and then click it onto the rear end of the bayonet here on this rifle, thus getting the two stuck together. They did drill a little hole underneath once they figured out the troops were going to be dumb and do stuff like that, but, you know, I can't say I blame them. And that would allow you to then remove the bayonet from one of them, therefore getting the two rifles apart. And that's pretty much it. It's a really simple rifle. One thing I guess I didn't cover is the sling band back here to be able to loop it in. But again, we're talking about a really simple rifle here in a relatively modern for the time caliber, at least what became a very standardized caliber later on. It's relatively handy and short, at least as far as a carrying perspective. However, we'll talk about how the actual handling is on this here in a minute, but let's roll in some more footage of this thing in use. Because there's no safety on the gun, the way this is designed to be loaded is you load in your 5 rounds, and then you would push down on your top round, kind of like so, and then that would allow the bolt to ride over the top. So you now have a gun with a full magazine, but no round in the chamber. So obviously if there's no round in the chamber, I guess their logic is you don't have to worry about a safety. However, the other byproduct of that is if I wanted to game it a little bit, which, considering I don't have a French officer yelling at me not to do this, if I wanted to, I can actually cheat another round in there. So now I have a full magazine plus 1 in the chamber for a total of 6 rounds before I have to do another reload. What do you think?
That's fun.
Yeah, right?
I like that.
Now, obviously, I don't have an immense amount of experience with one of these rifles. I have shot quite a few other military surplus rifles. I have had the pleasure of shooting most rifles of the belligerent countries during World War II, this one included, and I would have to say that from a handling perspective, well, again, from a logistical standpoint and I guess material standpoint, this is a really excellent rifle. From a handling perspective, it leaves a little bit to be desired. Again, the idea of having to like walk around with this with an empty chamber just due to the lack of a safety, I'm not a huge fan of that. And now I get, yeah, you could just keep a round in the chamber if you weren't under the watchful eye of a officer, sure. But then if you're like crawling through brush or anything like that, if anything is to get inside that trigger guard, you know, boom, rifle goes off, and that's not ideal, especially depending on where your buddies are or where you are in relation to your rifle when that happens. So having the ability to have a round in the chamber and not let just anything snagging the trigger set this thing off would be obviously better, but that's, you know, 21st century perspective talking there. And then just the actual handling of this thing, or the manipulation of this thing I should say, can get pretty clumsy and clunky. So again, the bolt, while it does deposit right by the trigger and allow you to grab it back here, it's a little awkward. There's been a couple times where I'm shooting it where I can't quite get, like, I don't know if the round is sticking or something like that, but I have a little bit of a trouble with that primary extraction, and then it's hard to get leverage on it. You kind of have to release it, pop the bolt, and then be able to retrieve it back. Because all the action is still happening rear of where that bolt knob actually is, it's really easy to have your thumb hanging out in the wrong spot back here and have that kind of bite you a little bit. The bolt itself isn't abundantly smooth. This particular example is actually not bad, but I have felt others that are not nearly as smooth as this thing is. And again, the fact that I, as an end user, cannot adjust the zero, again, I get it in the context of the time, but again, 21st century vision talking, that's less than ideal. Again, it is theoretically possible to replace the rear sight, but you'd have to figure out which one you need and be able to find that one available somewhere, probably online. So take that for what it is. However, from a historical perspective, all the modern handling issues aside, this is still a really fascinating rifle. It was a rifle that I've been wanting to add to my collection for quite a while. I've actually had this thing for quite a while now as well. However, as you can probably imagine during the ammo crunch, 7.5 French ammo is not something that is readily accessible. However, one of the things that makes this beneficial over some of the other military surplus cartridges is while those are also unavailable, at least this one uses a standard bullet diameter, at least by today's standards, of again 308. So you can load up 150 grain 308 projectiles in this and shoot it just fine. I've done it. And 7.5 French dice are, I guess, readily available. At least I was able to find them when I picked this up. And as long as you can get at least a little bit of brass somewhere, you know, you're off to the races. You're shooting. It's nothing too complicated. Unlike, you know, my beloved Enfield rifles, a 311 projectile is a little bit unusual, or even the 7.7 Japanese or 6.5 Carcano shooting a 2.68 projectile. That stuff is not readily available, whereas the components for this are a little bit easier to get a hold of. So from a shooter's perspective and a collector's perspective, there are definitely some benefits there if you want to be able to shoot rifles in your own collection. Now, if you are more interested in seeing the manipulation side of things and seeing how these handle in field conditions, definitely check out Bloke on the Range's channel. Excellent channel. If you're not already subscribed, you should be, and I even support them on Patreon. But they went to Finnish Brutality, or it was Winter Brutality 2021 back in Finland, and the chap who kind of helps out on that channel was running a MOS 36, and the brutality matches, whether it's Finnish Brutality, Desert Brutality, whatever brutality match it is, they do a pretty good job of trying to do interesting match stages, which really stresses the rifle and the shooter, mostly the shooter, and sees how, and with the goal of seeing how things are going to perform in as close to field conditions as you can get in a civilian context. And again, I'll let you draw your own conclusions about how the MOS 36 held up, especially compared to the Enfield that Bloke was running over there. But again, just another point of information, and the link to that video will be down in the description below. So all in all, this is a really interesting rifle. Like I said, it's one I've wanted to add to the collection for a while. It's one that I don't plan on getting rid of in my collection. So if it's something you've been looking for, as I alluded to at the beginning of the video, French rifles have been, I think, underappreciated in the US market, and the benefit of that is they're not as expensive as some of the contemporary rifles to this from other countries might be. Again, it is a very simple design. It's not like, you know, a Schmidt-Rubin of the same time period. You know, it's like this is a sundial and a Schmidt-Rubin is a Rolex. Like they both tell you the time, but the amount of craftsmanship that has to go into each one is a little bit different. But so while these would have been cheaper to produce, they're also a lot cheaper for us to purchase in today's money, which is definitely beneficial. I don't know if that's going to last forever though, so if it's something you're interested in, the sooner the better is kind of always the case with milsurps, but definitely pick one up if you're interested. And I do definitely want to say thanks to my supporters over on Patreon. It's a very small community of us over there, but with their contributions, it allowed me to help facilitate getting the ammo to shoot through this. And I guess I'll say too, if you've made it this far in the video, you probably watch my channel on a regular basis, and you've probably noticed that I haven't been putting out a bunch of content over the last couple months. or even on Instagram or anywhere else for that matter, or Facebook. And I've just had a lot going on in the last couple months, between the passing of my grandmother, going to a couple different weddings, having my own wedding. It's just been a pretty busy couple months, and there were just other things that deserved my attention other than getting out to the range. I think while they've been extremely understanding, the people that, if anyone's going to say it's not fair, it's people on Patreon, because they are financially supporting the channel and there's a lack of content coming out. So I do want to, just in front of everyone who's watching this, say thanks again to the people who support me over there. Again, your contributions do make a huge difference in what I'm able to do on this channel, and you guys are a driving force that helps to get me back out to the range on days like today and put rounds through this, put some rounds through my CZ shotgun again, because I finally found 3-inch slugs, but more on that in a different video. But I guess, I just want to really thank those people. I'm going to put your guys' names on the side of the screen, because again, it's a small community of us over there, and now that I'm getting back into the swing of things, I definitely want to give you guys more bang for your buck once again, and put out content on a more regular basis and start doing some more live streams and that kind of stuff here soon. If you guys want to check out the Patreon, there is a link down below. And if you decide you want to financially support the channel. If you're interested in my MilSerp videos, I have a whole playlist with a bunch of different rifles that you can enjoy. And I've got a lot more MilSerps coming, hopefully in the near-ish future, as ammo becomes available for those, or my hand loading becomes available for those, but stay tuned for that. But anyway, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.